My name is Chef Philippe Deger. I'm working with Culinary Lenotre. I've been a chef instructor since 2014. For the French festival, we are going to be making a apple tart or apple Normand from Normandy, which is a region in France. So when I was 16 years old, I just my father was an insurance broker. He had a client who was a baker or pastry shop, I should say, and that summer job became my life. So I was lucky that my first job uh, was exactly what I wanted to do. I was lucky that I had people who helped me when I was young in the profession or young period, and so it's my way to give back to the profession, I would say. I think it depends on the mood. I think many of us will react differently at a certain time, depending. I'm looking outside right now, depending on the season. So if it's summertime or springtime, I would go for maybe berries or strawberries. Maybe I like the combination of strawberry and rhubarb or strawberry and basil or things like this. So it depends on the mood. The first step of this pie is to make the dough. So we are going to be making a very basic pie dough, which is made of butter, flour, a little bit of sugar, and a little bit of salt, and some water. The particularity of this recipe is to use the butter and the water very cold in order not to develop the gluten. So we're going to be using the KitchenAid. It's a little bit noisy, but it's one way to make that dough. So the butter, the butter has been cut in cubes. Again, it is straight from the fridge. The water and the butter is straight from the fridge. So I am putting, as you can hear, the butter is very hard. So a cutting method means mixing the cold butter and the flour together. We are using a AP flour, pastry or cake flour will do, not a bread flour, which has too much protein. And then we're going to mix this. So again, flour and butter. We can add the salt and sugar at any moment. We don't need to be on a high speed. Huh? I would say a slow speed is enough. Again, if you don't have this machine, you can make it by hand. So let me show you. It's still into a state of powder right now. And now that if we still have some visible chunks of butter, that is okay. So there we go. It is like this. So now at this point, we are going to finish into a dough. So we are using the KitchenAid, but I wanted to show you just a bench scraper like this. If you don't have one of these at home, you can use that and just keep doing it on the table. That will be just about the same. All right, so again, that cold water, very important, the water should be cold. So good idea to scale it ahead of time and leave it in the fridge. Or if you don't have time, maybe put some ice cube and remove the ice cube and scale what you need. So I'm dumping the water, and now that the liquid has been added, it will very quickly become a dough. The objective is not to overmix the dough. If we do overmix the dough by mistake, the dough will be a bit tough and not flaky. So this dough can be made ahead of time. If you want, can be made a few hours or the day before. I would even say it can even be kept in a freezer. If you're working, if you organize, I would say similar to working in a pastry shop. We can make a dough and place it in a freezer and use it once defrosted at a later date. All right, so just bring it together. Try to pick up the remaining flour. And like we say in French, voila. So I'm going to wrap it. And then put it in the fridge. The dough was just made. It is now resting in the fridge. The next step is to peel and pre-cook the apple. I have in front of me Granny Smith, but we could use any sort of apple. I would look for the sweetness. As far as choice, the Granny Smith is a bit tangy, but the Honey Crisp apple is a good choice. The Golden Delicious would be also a good choice. So now the apple have been peeled. I'm going to cut them in two and remove the core. There I'm going to cut them. But the particularity of this pie is that we are not cutting in slices. So we give the effect as if it was cut in slices, but we are not cutting them all the way in order to keep them whole, or maybe a half, I should say, when I look at the finished product. So what I do is I hold the knife a certain way, and I'm not going to be cutting the all the way down. So what I will do is tilt a little bit the knife, so one part of the apple will still be uh, uh, connected with the other part of the apple. So I cut. So doing so, as you see, the apple stays together. All right, so the apple have been cut, or pre-cut, I should say. Now again, the objective is not to cut the slices all the way, but to keep it rather together. So this will be part of the decoration. All right, so the next step is to pre-cook this apple with butter. So in a saucepan, I'm going to melt butter. In that case, questions could be, is it salted, unsalted? I would say to your choice. And this is when the first step of that flavor from that apple brandy or Calvados from Garrel is going to be used. So we use, I would say, depending on your taste. In that case, I'm adding about 20 grams. I scale about 30 grams of Calvados, but I think that 20 grams should be enough for this quantity of butter. I'm going to dip the apple into that butter and Calvados to make sure that the butter goes inside the slices. The apple has been peeled, sliced, and dipped into butter and Calvados. We are going to pre-bake them. Just make sure that they are tender enough before we add them to the rest of the pie. So we have an oven set at 325 Fahrenheit, and we are going to pre-bake them depending on the quality of the apple. Some apple will cook earlier, some will take more time to bake or to cook. I would say 20 minutes. But again, depending on the oven that you have at home, each oven bakes differently, and it may take as long as maybe half an hour. Next step of making that apple pie, the dough has been made. The apples are pre-baking in the oven. Now we're going to do is line up the dough into a ring. I happen to be using a ring made of aluminum but stainless steel, but you could use any mold that you want. The size of this ring is about 8 inches. We are going to be applying a little bit of butter to the ring itself in order for the dough to be sticking to the ring. So in order to line up, in order to use the dough and line up the shell, I'm going to be using a rolling pin, some flour, so the dough that we're going to be using doesn't stick to the rolling pin or the table. The ring has a layer of butter. We have a tray lined up with a parchment. I am using a dough which comes straight from the fridge. Again, it has rested at least, I would say, an hour or so. But like I was saying earlier, it can be made the day before. So that flour will help for the dough not to stick to the table. But again, we don't want to add too much flour because the objective is not to add flour to the dough, but just so it doesn't stick. So in other words, the size of this dough should be bigger than the size of the ring, the 8 inches in diameter, and also about 2 inches on the side. So therefore, we have 8 plus 2 and 2, which makes 12 inches. So we want this dough to be at least 12 inches. All right, so the ring is there. I am applying the dough in the center. If we see pieces of butter, that is fine. This is even a good thing because it will help to create flakiness as the dough bakes. I'm going to remove the excess of dough. For that, I'm using a rolling pin. We could also use a knife. I'm going to put it back in the fridge. The first action is to melt the butter. The recipe is made of sugar, butter, eggs, flour, and the Cockerel Calvados. So a very basic recipe, but simple, but very good. So on that filling with Calvados, the butter has been melted, and we are just going to combine it together. So the eggs, the whole eggs, with the sugar. The butter should be room temperature, but not boiling hot. We don't want the hot melted butter to cook the eggs. The cooking of the eggs will take place in the oven, not in here. I'm adding the flour, just enough flour to combine everything together as it bakes. On that recipe, I even removed a little bit of flour from the original recipe that I had, just enough for the filling to be firm enough once baked. Making sure there is no lumps, so everything is smooth. The eggs, the sugar, and the flour together. Flour was AP flour. If you use a cake or pastry flour, that would be just fine. I am adding the warm or to room temperature butter. Like I was saying, it could be optional of brown butter or beurre noisette. Again, unsalted butter. We don't add too much butter, too much salt to the recipe. And lastly, the Calvados, the good stuff, which does add to the finish, which does add for the flavor. I have made that recipe without any liquor and with, and um, it really makes for a better flavor. See, it was quick. The filling is made. To complete the making of that Norman tart, we have the pre-baked apple, we have the dough that has been lined up into the shell, we have the filling itself. We're going to combine everything together. So with the dough straight from the fridge, we are going to apply about a little less than half an inch or 1 centimeter into the unbaked dough. So the filling first. So not too much, huh? I know you'd be tempted to maybe all the recipe, but it would be a little too much. And also the fact that those apples have been pre-cooked, they shrank a little bit, um, which helps us to put more apple into the pie. The pie is complete before baking. It should look this way. See, the dough, the filling first, then the pre-baked apple, and now right away in the oven. The pie came out of the oven. We let it cool down. It can still smell very well. And now that the pie has cooled down just enough, I would say about half an hour or maybe an hour if you can wait. We're going to cut it and share it with your guests. All right. So as is, it's very good, but we can definitely serve it with something like ice cream, like I'm going to be using, or it could be a little crème fraîche, sour cream, chantilly cream if you wanted. Thank you very much for having watched the video, and I hope you can duplicate and make that video at home and share it with your family and friends.